I found out my boss was my biological father after he tried to fire me. I was never the type to ask big questions about the past. I grew up knowing that my mother had raised me alone and that my father left when I was very little. Nothing else. No photos, no letters, no name. She always avoided the topic with vague phrases like, "He's not worth talking about," or "You're better off without him." And over the years, I learned not to insist. Not because I didn't care, but because every time I did, her face would change, as if she remembered something too dark to put into words. But all that changed the day I met Marcelo. He was the CEO of the company where I started working at 27. A multinational tech company, serious, with rigid hierarchies and silent hallways. I had started as an administrative assistant, with no big expectations, just to gain experience. But from the first moment, something about the way he looked at me threw me off. Not in a creepy or inappropriate way, but confusing. As if he already knew me. As if he saw in me something I couldn't see. Marcelo was a serious man in his mid-50s, with a deep voice and firm steps. He wasn't close to anyone. He had a reputation for being cold, demanding, nearly impossible to impress. But with me, there was something different. Sometimes he would stop by my desk to ask tiny questions, like he was looking for an excuse to talk to me. Or he gave me tasks that weren't part of my role, as if he wanted to test me. I took it as a challenge. I thought maybe he saw potential in me, that he wanted me to grow. And honestly, I liked it. Not him, that would be weird, but the way he pushed me without saying it. In less than a year, I was offered a promotion. I became team coordinator. I started going to more important meetings, to have a voice, to finally feel acknowledged. But just when I was starting to feel comfortable, everything changed. One afternoon, HR called me in. "We need to talk about your recent performance," they said. I didn't understand a thing. My team was hitting targets. No negative reports. No conflicts. But the tone was dry, cold, like they had already made up their minds. When I got to the meeting room, there was Marcelo, sitting, with a neutral expression. And next to him, an HR rep. "We believe there have been certain irregularities in your work," she said. Administrative errors that could compromise important processes. I was in shock. I didn't know what they were talking about. I started explaining, defending myself, showing evidence. But Marcelo said nothing. He just stared at me, as if he wasn't the same man who had supported me from day one. I felt the ground open up beneath my feet. They gave me a week to clarify the situation. A euphemism to say I was on the verge of being fired. I didn't sleep that night. I checked every file, every email, every number. I found nothing wrong. On the contrary, everything was in order. So then why were they targeting me? It was in that mental chaos that my mother called. She always called on Wednesdays. But that night, her voice sounded shakier than usual. "You sound strange," she said. "Maybe I'm getting fired," I replied, and I started telling her everything. Marcelo, the supposed mistakes, the tension. I didn't know why I was doing it. I just needed to vent. And then, there was a long silence on the other end of the line. "What did you say your boss's name was?" my mother asked, almost in a whisper. Marcelo Viller." And then, something happened that I'll never forget. My mother let out a dry sob, like something had been ripped from her chest. I didn't understand anything. "Mama, what's wrong?" "That's his name. That's him." "Who is he?" "The man who left you." "Your father." I felt the air leave my lungs. The world stopped. "That can't be." "It is. Marcelo Viller. He was my boss when I worked at the consulting firm. I was 23. It was short. He never wanted to acknowledge you. He said he wasn't ready, that he had a career ahead of him." I didn't know what to say. It was like being thrown into the void. That night I cried. I cried for the child I was, for the woman I am, for everything I didn't know, for everything that now was falling apart. Marcelo wasn't just my boss. He was my father. And he had tried to fire me without saying a word, without recognizing me, without looking me in the eyes and saying, "Yes, it's me." For days, I walked like a ghost through the office. Every time I saw him walk by, I felt nauseous, angry, confused, but also something worse. A part of me still wanted him to see me, to acknowledge me, to say something. He didn't. Until one day, I couldn't take it anymore. I went up to his office, knocked on the door, walked in. "I want to talk to you." He looked at me, closed his laptop, nodded. "Did you know who I was from the beginning?" He paused, took a deep breath, then said, "Yes." That yes hit me like a stone. "And you still wanted to fire me?" "I wanted to protect you. I didn't know how to handle it. It was a mistake that you ever came here. I shouldn't have accepted you." "Protect me? Firing me is protecting me." It was easier that way. And that's when I knew. He wasn't just a coward. He was someone who had decided to erase me twice. I didn't say another word. I turned around and walked out. But something inside me changed forever. After that conversation in his office, I was never the same again. I couldn't look at him the same way either. Because now, he wasn't just Marcelo, the distant CEO, the unreachable man. Now he was Marcelo, my biological father. And also, the one who had decided to fire me so his secret wouldn't come to light. I spent days trying to process everything. How could he have had me in front of him for over a year and not say a single word? What kind of person looks at their own daughter and still puts her on the blacklist? As soon as I left his office that day, I went straight to the bathroom. I locked myself in a stall and threw up. I felt nauseous, not because of what I had eaten, but because of everything swirling inside me. And when I thought I couldn't feel any dirtier, I looked in the mirror and saw his eyes in mine, and that broke me in two. At the office, the tension started to show in the air. Marcelo stopped greeting me, even stopped looking at me. My coworkers noticed something strange, but no one asked. In those corporate environments, silence is rule number one. But some people started treating me differently, as if they knew something had changed, even if they didn't know what. One afternoon, my direct manager called me into a private meeting. "I was asked to reduce your involvement in key projects," he told me, uncomfortable. "It's not my decision. I'm just following orders." "Orders from who?" I asked, though I already knew the answer. "From above." Nothing else needed to be said. Marcelo hadn't fired me, but he was pushing me to leave on my own. And in a way, that was what hurt the most. That instead of talking, facing me like an adult, he had chosen to erase me through the back door. Just like he did with my mother. Just like he did with me, even before I was born. I thought about quitting. I was tired, humiliated, wounded, but something inside me stopped me. I wasn't going to leave without doing something. Not again. So I started digging. I had access to some old HR files. Nothing confidential, but enough to confirm things. There I found staff records from over 30 years ago. And yes, there it was. Marcelo Villar and my mother, Gabriela Ortega, had worked in the same office for almost 2 years. He was a project manager. She was an analyst. They had traveled together, shared reports, even a group photo from a year-end event. In that photo, she was looking at him. He wasn't. Even in that image, you could see everything that would come later. I wanted to talk to her, to my mother, but I didn't know how. I felt a mix of gratitude and rage toward her. Because yes, she had raised me alone, but she had also hidden a huge part of my story. Not because she wanted to protect me, like she said, but because silence helped her avoid reliving her own pain. But in the end, one night, I called her. "I need to know everything." And for the first time, she told me without filters. I was 23, and he was my direct boss. At first it was just glances, then dinners, then business trips. He was charming, I swear. I never thought it would end like this. When I told him I was pregnant, he changed. He asked me not to say anything, that it could ruin his career, that he wasn't ready to be a father. He offered me money. I said no. After that conversation in his office, I was never the same again. I couldn't look at him the same way either. Because now, he wasn't just Marcelo, the distant CEO, the unreachable man. Now he was Marcelo, my biological father. And also, the one who had decided to fire me so his secret wouldn't come to light. I spent days trying to process everything. How could he have had me in front of him for over a year and not say a single word? What kind of person looks at their own daughter and still puts her on the blacklist? As soon as I left his office that day, I went straight to the bathroom. I locked myself in a stall and threw up. I felt nauseous, not because of what I had eaten, but because of everything swirling inside me. And when I thought I couldn't feel any dirtier, I looked in the mirror and saw his eyes in mine, and that broke me in two. At the office, the tension started to show in the air. Marcelo stopped greeting me, even stopped looking at me. My coworkers noticed something strange, but no one asked. In those corporate environments, silence is rule number one. But some people started treating me differently, as if they knew something had changed, even if they didn't know what. One afternoon, my direct manager called me into a private meeting. I was asked to reduce your involvement in key projects, he told me, uncomfortable. It's not my decision, I'm just following orders. Orders from who? I asked, though I already knew the answer. From above. Nothing else needed to be said. Marcelo hadn't fired me, but he was pushing me to leave on my own. And in a way, that was what hurt the most. That instead of talking, facing me like an adult, he had chosen to erase me through the back door. Just like he did with my mother. Just like he did with me, even before I was born. I thought about quitting. I was tired, humiliated, wounded, but something inside me stopped me. I wasn't going to leave without doing something. Not again. So I started digging. I had access to some old HR files. Nothing confidential, but enough to confirm things. There I found staff records from over 30 years ago. And yes, there it was. Marcelo Villar and my mother, Gabriela Ortega, had worked in the same office for almost 2 years. He was a project manager. She was an analyst. They had traveled together, shared reports, even a group photo from a year-end event. In that photo, she was looking at him. He wasn't. Even in that image, you could see everything that would come later. I wanted to talk to her, to my mother, but I didn't know how. I felt a mix of gratitude and rage toward her. Because yes, she had raised me alone, but she had also hidden a huge part of my story. Not because she wanted to protect me, like she said, but because silence helped her avoid reliving her own pain. But in the end, one night, I called her. I need to know everything. And for the first time, she told me without filters. I was 23, and he was my direct boss. At first it was just glances, then dinners, then business trips. He was charming, I swear. I never thought it would end like this. When I told him I was pregnant, he changed. He asked me not to say anything, that it could ruin his career, that he wasn't ready to be a father. He offered me money. I said no. The following weeks were a toxic mix of tension, silence, and small acts of revenge disguised as formality. Marcelo never contacted me directly again. He sent others, wrote impersonal emails, avoided running into me in the hallways. But I knew that every one of my movements irritated him, that my presence reminded him of something he had spent over 30 years trying to bury. I didn't leave. Not for a second did I consider it, because now this wasn't just about a job. It was about my story, about my place, about reclaiming the respect that had been denied to me since before I was born. And one day, everything exploded. It was a Tuesday afternoon, a big meeting, with several department heads, and I was included because I was in charge of coordinating the implementation of a new internal system. I had worked on that project for weeks. Everything was in order. My presentation was solid, but when it was time to speak, Marcelo spoke first. Before we begin, I want to make some adjustments to the project structure. From today forward, coordination will be handled by Esteban Gomez. Esteban was new. He had only been at the company for 3 months. He didn't even know 40% of the system. I froze. I looked around. No one said a word. Any objections? Marcelo asked, knowing full well that the only one affected was me. I raised my hand. Yes, I do. I've led this project from the start. I know every detail. What's the reason for the change? Strategic decision, he said without looking at me. Strategic or personal? There, the silence changed. Tense. Sharp. I don't have to justify internal decisions, Miss Ortega. You do, when they're discriminatory. Everyone looked down. Some pretended to check their notes. Others looked at their watches. I stood there, heart about to explode. Then let it be recorded that I am being removed without justified cause, and that the replacement lacks the necessary training. No one spoke. No one defended me. But they also didn't silence me. And that was already a victory. As I left the room, I went straight to human resources. I asked to speak with the head of the department. She wasn't someone I had regular contact with, but I knew I had to do everything formally. I want to file an internal complaint for abuse of power, discrimination, and conflict of interest. She tensed up. Do you have evidence? Yes. Plenty. And I also have something else. I pulled out a folder. Inside were all the documents, screenshots, and records showing how my situation had changed since Marcelo found out who I was. Everything organized. Everything clear. And at the end, a letter. Not for the company. For him. This is a copy. The original is at home. And another one with my lawyer. I don't want this to go to court, but if they keep pushing me, I will. Because this isn't just a case of wrongful termination. It's a story of abandonment, concealment, and retaliation. She listened, took notes, asked for time to evaluate possible actions. I left knowing I had done the right thing, but also knowing that retaliation was coming. And it did. Marcelo blocked me from all projects. My coworkers started avoiding me, some out of fear, others out of convenience. Only one person approached me, Carla, a woman from finance. I admire what you're doing, she told me one afternoon in the kitchen. You have no idea how much it helps me to hear you say that, I replied. That night I cried, but not from sadness, from relief, because, for the first time, someone really saw me. A few days later, I received a formal summons for a meeting with the company's ethics committee. Marcelo wouldn't be present, but the rest of the board would. I brought everything, every document, every piece of evidence. But more than anything, I brought my story. And when I spoke, I didn't do it as a victim. I did it as a daughter, as a professional, as a woman. Marcelo Villar is my biological father. He abandoned me before I was born. He hid me for over 30 years. And when we finally shared a space, he tried to erase me again. Not because of my performance, but because of his own shame. Because I represent what he never wanted to face. There was a brutal silence. As I left, I felt like it didn't matter what they decided. I had already won. I had spoken my truth. I had broken the silence he had imposed over my life. Days later, they called me. The company has decided to accept your complaint and proceed with a full audit. Marcelo has been temporarily suspended while the situation is evaluated. I didn't scream. I didn't cry. I didn't jump. I just breathed. For the first time in years, I took a deep breath. And I knew that, no matter what happens, nothing, and no one was ever going to make me feel invisible again. The following weeks felt like watching a tower crumble brick by brick. Marcelo, the untouchable, the one who had ruled from his office for years like a modern-day king, suddenly began to vanish from the landscape. He no longer attended meetings. His name stopped appearing in mass emails. And most significantly, his office remained closed, with the lights off, like a symbolic tomb in the middle of the building. I was called in again by the internal committee, this time with the results of the audit. The words were cold, institutional. Inconsistencies were found in the decision-making process regarding your professional development. Documented discrimination was identified. There was also a deliberate attempt to dismiss you without justified cause. Marcelo Villar has been permanently terminated, with no possibility of reinstatement. In the past, maybe I would have cried, screamed, celebrated, but not now. Now, I just felt a calm serenity, because it wasn't revenge that drove me. It was justice, and that had been served. But it didn't end there. Days later, I received an email. It wasn't from him, but from a strange address with the subject line, "For you." It was a letter, signed by Marcelo. I know I have no right to ask you for anything, not even forgiveness. But I want to explain, even if it's too late. I didn't acknowledge you because I didn't know how. Because I was afraid. Because I've always been weak. Because I hid behind my achievements to avoid seeing what I had lost. Watching you grow from afar, I came to understand all I had denied myself. And when I saw you in front of me for the first time at the company, I knew who you were. Your eyes, your way of speaking, it was you. But it was already too late, wasn't it? I couldn't face it. I didn't know how. And when I tried to push you away, it wasn't out of hate. It was guilt. Shame. Because every time I saw you, you saw all of me. And that, for someone like me, was unbearable. I didn't reply. Not because I had nothing to say, but because I understood there was no need. He had spoken. Finally. He had taken responsibility. Late, yes. But he had done it. A few days later, the news of his dismissal started to circulate outside the company. Some industry media mentioned it, without going into details, using phrases like, due to internal irregularities. His reputation collapsed within weeks. Conference invitations canceled. Business deals frozen. Uncomfortable silences among those who once laughed at his every comment. I kept working. Not only did I not leave, but I was promoted. They offered me a position leading a new team with full autonomy. I accepted, not out of pride, but out of commitment, because after everything I had lived through, I felt I had something greater to prove, that I wasn't an unacknowledged daughter. I was a complete professional, a woman who didn't need anyone else's name to succeed. My colleagues, once distant, began to approach me. Some apologized for staying silent. Others simply offered their support in small gestures. A coffee on my desk, a hand on my shoulder, a smile that said, "I see you." And outside the change was noticeable too. My mother, who had carried so much pain for so many years, hugged me one day and told me something I'll never forget. I never had the courage to confront him. But you did. And that's yours, not mine. You finished what I couldn't. There was no resentment in her voice. Only relief. And for the first time, an admiration that shook me to the core. I decided to take a few days off. I went alone to a cabin in the south, surrounded by trees, with a notebook and lots of books. I walked along the trails, listened to the river, wrote without pressure, and one afternoon, as I watched the sunset from the porch, I realized that everything I had lived through had been necessary. Painful, yes, but necessary, because it forced me to grow, to break the mold, to look at the past through adult eyes, and not through the wounds of a child. When I returned home, I felt something inside me had changed forever. I no longer searched for explanations. I no longer needed to understand everything. It was enough to have made it through. One day, a new young employee came to find me. She said she wanted to talk to me. "I know what you went through," she said. "I have a complicated story too. And seeing you gave me strength." I stayed silent for a few seconds. Then I said, "Don't let yourself be defined by what others chose to hide. You have the right to take up space, to make noise if you have to shine, even if it makes others uncomfortable." She smiled, and I knew that conversation was also part of my healing. Time passed. Marcelo disappeared from the business world. His LinkedIn was deactivated. His name no longer appeared in the news. Now and then, someone would ask about him, like he was a character from another era. And internally I would think, he was never as important as he thought he was. Because now, I no longer needed to know if he recognized me, if he regretted it, if he remembered me. Because now, I had myself. And in the end, that was all I ever really needed. Today, I look at myself in the mirror and see a version of me I never imagined a few years ago. Not stronger, not braver, not wiser, just more aware of who I am, of what I deserve, of what I'm no longer willing to keep quiet about. My story didn't turn into a movie or some epic redemption saga. There was no dramatic soundtrack, no final scene in the rain. But there was something far more real, dignity, and that no one gave to me. I built it myself, step by step, with every painful decision, with every silence I broke, with every tear I turned into words. Marcelo never contacted me again after that last letter. I suppose he finally understood that his time in my life had expired, that he no longer had the power he once thought he had over my existence, that his image, his last name, his shadow, no longer weighed more than any old page found in a book no one reads anymore. I don't hate him, and that was hard to admit, because for a long time I thought hating him was the fair thing to do. But no, I don't hate him because that would mean still keeping him inside me. What I feel now is different, a mix of compassion and distance. I see him as someone lost, a man who chose not to look where he should and preferred to hide. I pity him, because he chose to lose me. With my mother, the relationship changed too. It became more honest. We no longer avoid uncomfortable topics. Sometimes we talk about the past without tears, as if we were folding an old sheet together, carefully, knowing we're never going to use it again, but not ready to throw it away either. She confessed that for a long time. She felt guilt for choosing someone like Marcelo, for not telling me, for making me grow up with a blank part of my story. I told her it didn't matter anymore, that all stories have silences, but what really matters is what we do when we finally break them. And I broke mine. My career keeps growing, not because I want to prove anything to anyone, but because I love what I do. I discovered that leading isn't just about managing tasks. It's about being able to lift someone up when others try to step over them, about seeing talent where others see problems, about making room for others to shine without thinking it dims your own light. Recently, I launched an internal mentorship program for young women entering the company. I teach them what I wish I had known at the start, that your story matters, that you don't need permission to take up space, that being firm doesn't make you difficult, that having scars doesn't disqualify you. On the contrary, it humanizes you. In my free time, I write, not fiction, not stories. I write memories, fragments, letters I'll never send, words that help me not forget what I've lived. Because I don't want to forget. I don't want to erase the past. I want to integrate it. I want every part of it, even the darkest one, to walk with me without defining me. I recently bought a new plant, a big, leafy ficus with strong leaves. I placed it by the window, in the same corner where I used to work with the lights off. And every morning as I water it, I whisper to it, not like a crazy person, but like someone talking to herself. We're okay. We're growing, even if it's not always visible. And yes, I'm growing, without noise, without scandals, with steady steps. One afternoon, coming home from work, I ran into a woman I hadn't seen in years. We had been co-workers during a distant phase, and she greeted me warmly. She said I looked more whole than ever. Then, with a curious tone, she asked, "And your dad? Did he ever show up?" I thought about lying, saying no, that I never knew anything. But no, not this time. Yes, he showed up, but he came too late. She fell silent, nodded, and we changed the subject. Because yes, he came too late, when I no longer needed him, when he could no longer hurt me, when it was already far too late to erase what I had built on my own. Today I have peace. Not every day, but most, and that is already a miracle. I rebuilt myself with what little I had, and with what others tried to take from me, but I also rebuilt myself with what no one could touch, my truth. And if there's one thing I've learned, and swore to never forget, it's this. The truth always finds a way out, even if they hide it, even if they deny it, even if they try to disguise it. Blood doesn't always make family. Sometimes it just makes history, and silences, sooner or later, end up speaking for themselves.